Adobe Firefly is the all-in-one creative studio with AI-powered image and video editing for today's creative process. Built for creators of every kind, Firefly helps you generate, edit, and experiment fast. Because the asks aren't getting smaller, the budgets aren't getting bigger, and the timelines, oh yeah, still tight. With all the best creative AI models in one place, Firefly brings your ideas to life. Unlock a better way to make with Adobe Firefly.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to The Middle, a show about bringing people who don't live on the coast into the national conversation. I'm Jeremy Hobson, broadcasting live from Urbana, Illinois, my hometown, and WILL, the station where I began my career decades ago. Tonight, we're asking you to tell us this. What is the most important issue to you heading into the election that's coming up in less than 3 weeks? We'll be taking your calls for the next hour at 1-844-4MIDDLE. That is 1-844-464-3353. You can also reach out to us on social media or on our website, listentothemiddle.com. Joining us tonight, USA Today national political correspondent Phillip Bailey, Urbana, Illinois Mayor Diane Marlin, and DJ Anthony Valadez. The Middle starts right after the news. Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, live this evening from WILL Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois. That's my hometown. It is great to have you here for this very first episode of The Middle. Now, this is a new show. There are some new aspects to it. We're going to go through them now. First of all, we have a house DJ. His name is Anthony Valadez. He comes to us from public radio station KCRW. Hi, Anthony.
Hey, Jeremy. How's it going?
It's great, and I'm so happy to have you here. And you are going to be bringing us some of the music from the place we are, which today is Illinois.
Absolutely. We're going to be focusing on the Midwest. So I've been doing some deep dive record digging. I'm surrounded by records right now, and I'm excited to share some of that with you.
Awesome. Well, we will hear from you as the show goes on. Now, as you know, Anthony, the goal of this show is to bring voices from the vast middle of the country into the national conversation, to elevate the voices of the people in the middle. And to that end, all the panel guests you hear on the show are going to be people based between the East and West Coasts. And we hope that many of you who call in are in the middle of the country as well. I ask, though, that as we have this conversation, we do it without condescension and with respect for one another. I want this to be a civil conversation, even when we disagree. Wouldn't that be nice, Anthony, to have a civil conversation?
That's what it's all about. We need a little bit of that right now.
In 2022. Now, tonight we are asking the question, what is the most important issue to you heading into the election that is coming up in less than 3 weeks? You can call us right now at 844-4MIDDLE. That is 844-464-3353. You can also find us on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, and you can email us by going to listentothemiddle.com. KentuckyUniversity.com. And while we wait for your calls, let's bring in our panel guest. Joining me here in the studio in Urbana is the mayor of this city, Diane Marlin. Mayor Marlin, it is great to have you here.
It's wonderful to be here.
And for people that don't know anything about Urbana, which is probably most of our listeners, it is a city where Abraham Lincoln spent almost 2 decades as a young lawyer. We are in the land of Lincoln, of course. What else should people know about this place?
Well, we're a small city, but you can have a big life here. We're the home of the University of Illinois, along with our sister city, Champaign. So if you enjoy browsing the web, using PayPal, saving money for your first Tesla, using YouTube, leaving reviews on Yelp, eating sweet corn, enjoying air conditioning in your home, or whipped cream in a can, I'll just say, you're welcome, America.
Well, you know what? And by the way, we didn't get any advertising revenue for what she just said, so and that's not fair. Let's welcome our other guest, Phillip Bailey, a USA Today political correspondent, Pulitzer Prize winning, by the way, based in Louisville, Kentucky, joining us from Louisville Public Media. Phillip, thank you so much for being here.
Jeremy, man, as always, thank you for the invite.
And you have been covering politics in Kentucky, which is the home, of course, of the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell for a very long time.
Yes, I actually knew Senator McConnell. I first met him when I was 18 years old.
Wow.
So I've known the senator for about 20 years, even before I was a journalist, actually.
Wow. Well, it is great to have you here. Again, our number 844-4MIDDLE. And let's go to the phones because we've already got calls coming in. Tony in Ann Arbor is on the line. Hi, Tony.
Hi, good evening.
Well, and our question was, what is the most important issue to you heading into this election? So what is it for you?
Well, I am a registered independent in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is very left-leaning, but I do practice as an emergency physician in Livingston County, and I've gone out to the west side of Michigan as well. And so I kind of straddle the entire state in how I meet people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think many other specialties or professions have that chance to meet the whole spectrum, the political spectrum. But what I like to see and what I'd like to hear more is exactly what you're doing, is having dialogue. And I think with more dialogue, whether it's in less competitive forums than, say, a debate, but more like a listening tour, a town hall, just to see how our future politicians act with and deal with opinions and evidence that goes against what they perhaps came into the room with. Well,
and so let me go to your opinion then. What would you say is the most important issue to you as you go into this election? What are you going to vote on?
I'd like to see people who try to serve the entire state. I'm going to be voting for people mostly. There are some issues like in, abortion or voting rights, but I'm looking for people who really speak to the issues that the whole state really cares about, and not just their select minority. And I think that's probably better for the country.
Diane Marlin, you're the mayor of a city that has a lot of people with a lot of different opinions. You probably hear this kind of thing a lot.
Right, but what you're saying resonates because at my level as a mayor, most of the issues I deal with, there's no party affiliation in front of a pothole. You have to fix the streets, you have to keep the lights on, you have to make sure you have funding for essential services, you have to deal with housing and utilities and taking care of the basic needs of the population, and you can't put a partisan twist on that. So what we deal with are issues that everyone needs, and frankly, we all have that in common.
Let's go to another call. We've got Joseph on the line from Fargo, North Dakota. Joseph's not there yet, but this is a live show. This is what's going to happen. We had Joseph. We don't have Joseph. Phillip, what about that? What about what you just heard there from Tony?
Well, look, I think Tony's description and his issue with politics right now is actually pretty widespread. USA Today, we actually did a poll about 100 days out before the election. Mm-hmm. And what we found is that 6 in 10 voters say that a third party or multiple other parties are necessary, right? Including 64% of Democrats and 46% of Republicans. Just 15% of independents like Tony, Jeremy, say the two parties do a good job of representing their political views. There are these raging centrists that are out here, people who feel very alienated from the current Republican Party, particularly as it tries to reconcile how it deals with President Trump. But they're also not particularly pleased with the Democratic Party's direction. Some of that is on President Biden, whose popularity numbers obviously are pretty low at this point. But I think there is a growing attitude amongst independents that we're not hearing our way of life, our sort of compromise with folks in our politics, right? Like it's day to day that these raging centrists are at the local level, like with Mayor Marlin, and they're not feeling adequately represented at the national level in particular.
You wonder what that is going to mean for turnout. A midterm election is often about turnout. Who's going to turn out on the Democratic side? Who's going to turn out on the Republican side? And when people don't feel like the party represents them fully, do they turn out to vote, Phillip?
Right. I think oftentimes people do not. But I think a state I'm very interested in, Jeremy, is Georgia, right? Where I think where they've already started early voting on Monday. I'm very interested to see if there are going to be some split ticket voting, which took place in 2020, where you see some folks maybe pull the lever for Governor Brian Kemp, the Republican who's being challenged by Stacey Abrams for governor, but also then switch over and maybe vote for Raphael Warnock for U.S. Senate as opposed to Herschel Walker. In those races like that, right, like where we saw, Kemp do pretty well and win decisively over David Perdue in that primary, but at the same time, Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, who was challenged by President Trump to, quote, find, unquote, more votes after he lost the 2020 election. Split ticket voting, I think, is what a lot of independent centrist voters are looking for.
Now we can go to Joseph in Fargo, North Dakota. Joseph, what issue is going to bring you to the polls?
As a 75-year-old male, just speaking personally, the most important issue is keeping Social Security and Medicare intact. But thinking of all the people around me, I think the most important issue is a woman's right to choose.
Diane Marlin, you're not dealing with the issues of Social Security and Medicare or abortion at the local level, but you speak to your constituents. How big of an issue do you think it is going to be for them as they go to vote this November?
Well, the impact of inflation on people who are living on a fixed income is huge, and we're seeing that here as we are in the rest of the country. So especially food, gas, some of the medicine, some of the basics that folks need. And a woman's right to choose, it's like, how long do we have to keep fighting this battle? I mean, I think back to the battles we fought in the late 60s and early 70s just to get the rights that we have today, and now we're on the verge of losing them again.
Let me ask you about the inflation issue, though, because I think this is one of the areas where we see a difference in the middle of the country than on the coast, because the salaries just are typically not as high in the middle of the country. The cost of living is generally not as high. And when gas prices go up, when the price of milk goes up at the store, it's going to have more of an impact in some ways in the middle of the country in places like this than it would in New York.
A lot of our people, especially in this area, drive many miles back and forth to work. For example, we're a regional employer with the university here. We have a regional medical center, so people may drive 10, 20, 30, 40 miles each way to get to work, and that adds up. And if you don't live in a large city with a mass transit, you depend on your vehicle to drive. So that's a factor. And then, of course, there's the trucking industry and all the other transportation modes that depend on it. But and the same thing with your price of food and that sort of thing.
Phillip, abortion is obviously an issue that is going to drive a lot of people out right now because it truly is on the ballot. But Social Security and Medicare, are they in this election?
Well, look, the polling that USA Today and other news organizations have done, people mention inflation, they mention climate change, they mention abortion, the economy as a whole. The future of programs such as Social Security and Medicare did not make the list. But that doesn't mean it's not being discussed. For example, Congressman Steve Scalise, the number 2 House Republican of Louisiana, he mentioned recently how the GOP does have its plans, and they do include cuts to certain entitlement programs and certain changes to those entitlement programs should Republicans win the House, which honestly GOP officials and even Democrats privately will admit the House is probably lost. I know a lot of Democrats won't admit that out loud on the record, but that's what people are preparing for. And I think you may see that surge as a last-minute issue, But Jeremy, we're in a time period now where our basic democracy is being challenged, right? Like, and that may come up later, but
it already has, by the way, Philip.
Right.
I will say, we've been taking calls on our number, which is 844-4MIDDLE or 844-464-3353. And one of the biggest topics by far that people have left messages on has been the issue of democracy. So I'm sure we're going to hear more about that as we go on. Again, 844-4MIDDLE is our number, and we'll be right back.
Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kidd with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Julia Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of to come around here and my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to The Middle. If you're just tuning in, we are live, and we are a new national call-in show focused on bringing voices from the middle of the country into the national conversation. I'm Jeremy Hobson, live from my hometown of Urbana, Illinois. My guests are Urbana Mayor Diane Marlin and USA Today political correspondent Phillip Bailey, who is in Louisville, Kentucky. And we are asking you what issue is moving you to get to the polls on November 8th. Our number is 844-4MIDDLE. That is 844-464-3353, or you can reach out to us at listentothemiddle.com or on social media. We did ask for calls before the show started, and we got some voicemails. Let's take a listen.
I am Mr. Edward Richard Davis of Frisco, Texas. I'm calling about a common problem that's been in the news all the time, really, over all of my close to 64 years of life, over the last several years with the lockdowns and the problems in the big cities across the country. The crime rate has skyrocketed again.
Hi, my name is Venkat. I'm calling you from Atlanta, Georgia. What is important to me in this midterm elections? Great question. The most important thing for anybody in this midterm election should be democracy. DEMOCRACY. Democracy is on the ballot, ladies and gentlemen, because you know what happened on January 6th.
Hi, my name is Tara, and I'm in Rockford, Illinois. One of the most important issues for me coming up in the election is transgender rights. I have a 4, almost 5-year-old transgender child, And so that's kind of on the foremost of our minds right now. Thanks so much. Bye.
Not the only call we got on that issue either, but let's talk about democracy, Phillip Bailey, because you brought that up earlier. That is something that has come up from a lot of people that have called in. I don't know how much that's going to drive people to vote, but it is certainly on people's minds.
Right. I mean, we have roughly, Jeremy, 300 plus or so election deniers on the ballot in some shape or form across the country. Folks who have still casted some doubt on Joe Biden winning the 2020 presidential election. I think we should always reiterate, Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election. But we have these folks running for everything from governor to secretary of state, attorney general, all the way down to ag commissioner and an auditor in some places that have nothing to do with elections. But some of these folks who have refused to accept the results are running for seats to oversee the next election. And that's a worry that's really across the board, Republicans and Democrats, but certainly on the Democratic side. But I think, Jeremy, though, what you're seeing, though, is as the polls are indicating in the final stretch, Americans are often selfish voters. They are thinking a lot more about their pocketbooks, a lot more about inflation and the economy, and polls are showing that, yes, they are aware of democracy being an issue, but it might not necessarily be the driving force of why they're turning out to vote.
It's usually the economy stupid, as James Carville would say. Let's go to another caller. We've got Carol on the line from Bixby, Oklahoma. Hi, Carol.
Hi.
What's your issue? What's bringing you out to the polls this year?
I am concerned about the democracy as well, and I am concerned about all the information that gets out there that is misinformation, and then uninformed voters. I worked the elections here in Tulsa, and the last primary I was in, so this is a runoff. We have closed primaries here. People came in and wondered why there were certain names not on the ballot because those were the ads they saw. They didn't realize that it wasn't their district. I had one person come in and look at the ballot and say to me, I don't know who these people are.
Diane Marlin, actually, so let me just stop you for 1 second, Carol, because I have to say, sometimes I go in to vote, and there are certain local officials. I have no idea. I haven't paid attention to the most local of races. And I mean, what do you do? How do you deal with that when people don't know? Because that would happen if that happens at the national level or bigger races. How do you deal with that?
Well, it's very frustrating because your local races, in my opinion, are your most important races. Your school board, your city government, your park districts. Those are the government entities that impact your life every single day. And, of course, the national as well. It's frustrating, you'd think, with all the media, the information channels that we have, the ways of communicating, you'd think that everybody would be very well educated, but it's just, I'm always shocked at how people stay within a very narrow, frame. They have certain things in their life they're interested in, and sometimes they do not make an effort to understand who they have to vote for. The bigger challenge, I think, is simply getting people to the polls. We've been, just in my last election, I was elected for my second term in spring of 2021. The turnout was half of what it was the previous 4 years. Illinois just had the second lowest voter turnout in their primary in the last 40 years.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it was very late in the year because of redistricting and that sort of thing. But it's getting people to the polls. And it's this sense of hopelessness almost that you feel among people.
Phillip Bailey, there are a couple of things, though, this time around that many of the pundits seem to think are going to get people to the polls, and one of them is abortion rights.
Yeah, and I think that certainly when the Dobbs decision came down, even after the leaked opinion, the Dobbs decision came down in the summer, Democrats and liberals and people on the left certainly felt an energy that this cascade of women were going to come to the polls to stand up for their reproductive rights. You heard many young women, Gen Z voters especially, say, I have less rights than my grandmother had, for example. But I think what's happened, though, is that in the machinery of the campaigns, Democrats have been very reluctant to say exactly what they want in terms of limitations and in terms of how accessible abortion should be, not really going on the offensive. And I think Republicans have returned the conversation for the most part to inflation, to the economy, and crime. I do think, though, with some of these ballot initiatives, like what you saw in Kansas, we have a ballot initiative here in Kentucky. I do think that you're going to have a revelation for a lot of pundits, which is conservative women, Republican women have gotten abortions too in the past 50-something years. And where they may not be pronouncing this in their political activism, right? We all go into that voting booth privately.
Right.
And what we do privately is up to us. And I'm very interested to see how these abortion referendums turn out more than anything else.
All right, let's go to another call. We've got John in Minneapolis, Minnesota on the line. By the way, another Twin City. This is Champaign, Urbana, the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the bigger Twin Cities. John, welcome to the program.
Hey there, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Tell us about what you're going to be voting on.
Well, I'm going to be voting just like one caller said earlier, for people. Like, it really is who are the candidates and what do they want. But I've done a lot of canvassing this summer, and abortion is for sure the number one issue. Well, both people voting for pro-life and pro-choice. I think it's going to drive people on both sides to the polls this year.
And what about you? Are you voting on the issue of abortion?
It's one of many issues. I mean, I'm going to vote Democrat, mostly because I believe they have better candidates who can lay out an actual plan for policy and not just, I'm against this. And I see a lot of national talking points in local candidates, which not really a strong way to run a local campaign.
All right. Well, John, thank you for that call. Diane Marlin, on the issue of abortion, I have to say, if you look back over the last several months in this entire election season, one of the things I think has been most impactful was that abortion rights vote in the state of Kansas. And I think it surprised a lot of people because a lot of people haven't spent a lot of time talking to people from Kansas, and they thought, oh, it's a red state. How could they possibly make this choice? They did. Do you think that that speaks to some sort of hidden majority of people across the country in red states that will go in and vote on the issue of abortion rights and vote in favor of abortion rights for the candidates who will support that?
Well, this isn't just abortion rights. It's reproductive rights, and it's basically control over your own body. And half the population are women, and frankly, they are the most qualified to make decisions about their bodies. So no matter what their political party or the leanings in other areas, I think this is a very personal issue that women and their partners and their families will support them on that. And frankly, it's not a surprise the way Kansas went. I think if people had actually gone to Kansas and talked to people in Kansas instead of assuming that they knew how they would vote, they would have discovered that. Same though, I think the election of President Trump in 2016 wouldn't have been such a shock if people had gotten off the coast and come to actually see what was going on in the middle of the country.
And come to the middle. Absolutely. Again, our number here is 844-4-MIDDLE. That is 844-464-3353. I want to read an email that's come in to us from Sarah in Lansing, who says, I'm always perplexed by the fact that both sides of politics fail to see how literally nothing will matter if we don't get a handle on climate change. Even though the left talks more about it, they fall painfully short in regard to bold change and laser focus on curbing our impact. I believe we owe this to the next generation. Now, Phillip, she says the left falls short. They did just pass the biggest climate change bill that the Biden administration did in the Inflation Reduction Act in the history of this country.
Right. And this was a complaint about the Biden administration, really, for the 2 years that they've been in office, is their inability to sort of turn the corner on the messaging aspect of it. But you hear this more and more, I think, particularly from younger voters, from Gen Z folks. After the Dobbs decision, for example, there were plenty of Gen Z activists who were saying, well, wait a minute, not just President Biden, but why didn't Barack Obama, why didn't previous Democratic majorities in the House and Senate, why didn't they codify, right, reproductive rights when they had majorities previously? And I think there's a higher expectation. I think one thing that's changed politically is that the left enters this politics simply not saying, oh, you've gotten my vote already, Democrats. No, you have to earn my vote. Mm-hmm. And the younger Democratic voters, the younger progressives who are even outside of the Democratic Party are saying on issues like abortion, on issues like climate change, and yes, the economy, the rent revolution is big for these younger voters in particular. They're demanding progressive legislation almost very similar to some other democracies and first world democracies we see across the country. So Democrats just simply can't get away, I think, anymore with leaning on, oh, Republicans are bad. And it's like, no, what are you going to do?
Let's go to John in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. John, what's the issue that is most important to you heading into this election?
Good evening. I consider myself to be generally conservative fiscally, but politically independent. So like some of the other voters, I will definitely be voting for the candidates. But at the same time, as far as national politics goes, inflation is what's most concerning to me.
Inflation. Thank you, John. Diane Marlin, you've had to deal with this issue at the local level, but I think for a lot of people, this is a big issue just because it hits their pocketbook. It's what we were talking about earlier. It's the economy stupid.
Exactly, and it hits cities as well. Everything that we're trying to do as a city, the costs have gone up, particularly with construction materials, and we're finding also that since the pandemic, the whole working and staffing levels is always a challenge, and we are making our salaries more competitive to attract the best and retain our staff. So inflation has hit us in a lot of ways, and that's always going to be an issue.
You know, it's interesting that we haven't heard from people talking about COVID. In many parts of this country, it feels like COVID is completely over. In other parts, it feels like it is not at all over.
We are still in the recovery phase. The last 2 years, I will say, have been hell, and I guess that's okay to say on this radio. But trying to get through the pandemic, in addition to maintaining all the other services that we're expected to provide, and actually meeting the higher needs during the pandemic, has just been incredibly difficult. And we're in the recovery phase. It's going to take years.
Well, and I bring that up also because there is an argument to be made that a lot of the inflation that is going on right now is at least...
Faraday presenta Ojos con Alergia y Picazón contra el jardinero. Y el ganador es Faraday Extra Fuerte. Para aliviar la picazón de los ojos por alergia, actúa más rápido y supera a Claritin y Flonase aún a las 24 horas. Faraday, adelante.
In some way related to COVID-19, to the supply chain issues, to the fact that in China, COVID-19 is most certainly not over, and that's where the things that we're buying are coming from in many cases, and that is driving the prices up for all of us.
Absolutely, and we run into it every day, but things have changed permanently, actually, for cities in many ways too. So we're all still adjusting to the post-pandemic reality.
Let's go to another call now. We've got Karen in St. Louis, Missouri. Karen, hello.
Hi. How are you?
I'm doing well. And what's the issue that's most important to you?
Well, I am concerned about the threat of violence by the right if the election doesn't go their way. I just watched a Frontline piece on Michael Flynn, and it's just really frightening that these people are out there believing that the election was stolen in 2020, and they're going to do everything they can to take control. And I guess the prevalence of guns in our society now, it just makes it very alarming that these elements are out there.
Diane Marlin?
You mentioned guns. Gun violence is a problem. Last year in our community, we had the highest level of gun violence ever experienced. We had about 130 confirmed shootings. This year, thankfully, that number's down by about 55%, and hopefully we can continue in that direction. But we seem to go in waves, and for a while, all you heard about was gun regulation, gun laws, and everything, and now you don't hear a word.
Phillip Bailey, let's talk about that for a second, because this is an issue where, one side in politically will say one thing about gun violence, and one side will say, don't touch my Second Amendment rights, and that's the main issue here. I don't know whether it breaks down differently between people on the coast and people in the middle, but how does that debate fall where you are in Louisville, Kentucky?
Well, look, Kentucky is a proud gun state, right? Like it's a state where people really value their Second Amendment rights. I think what gets muddied up is that, again, the disinformation and the machinery of government are very difficult things to untangle. Number one, people often are told that this legislation is going to do something that it's not going to do. That government's going to come in and take every single law-abiding citizen's gun, which I think most reasonable Americans would oppose. But that's not what a lot of this legislation is aimed at doing. It's often aimed at keeping assault weapons, very dangerous weapons, out of the hands of people who honestly have a mental health issue or probably shouldn't own a gun, period. But then at the same time, there's also, I think, a legitimate concern about on the right about Second Amendment rights and how they are portrayed in the public. Most gun owners are not violent people who are going out here committing mass murder or mass shootings. But again, when we get to the machinery of government, we have a consensus when we look at the polling. But then when we get to the filibuster in the Senate, we need 60 votes. When you get to this legislation being worked out differently at the House and then in the Senate, then it just all sort of just turns into shambles and nothing gets done. And Americans say, well, look, nothing gets done up there in Washington. Mm-hmm. I would be very interested in looking particularly at more purple states like Virginia and how they reconcile and untangle these things. Because at the state level, and as the mayor knows, that's where a lot of the work is really being done and accomplished.
We're talking with Phillip Bailey, USA Today political correspondent in Louisville, Kentucky, and Urbana, Illinois Mayor Diane Marlin. You can join the conversation at 844-4MIDDLE, and we'll be right back.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kidd with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world. The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of to come around here and my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. We're live from WILL in my hometown of Urbana, Illinois. This hour, my guests are Urbana Mayor Diane Marlin and USA Today political correspondent Phillip Bailey, who's in Louisville, Kentucky, which means we will not blame him at this hour if he's already drinking bourbon, though we did not provide it, Phillip. It's all on you. Okay. We are asking you, what is the issue getting you to the polls this midterm election? Our number 844-4MIDDLE. That is 844-464-3353. Let's go to Alan in Minneapolis. Hi, Alan.
I have a
tell them I'm on the phone. I'm on my way.
Oh, you're on the air, Alan. Tell me, what's your issue?
Yes. Well, a couple of things is getting me to the poll this November, and one is public safety. The other is civil rights. All over the country, you hear them saying how dangerous and how crime is going up, but really, like we have the couple of officers, was it in New York where they were sitting playing Pokemon Go, where the bank was being robbed. That's what's happening, and we need to put a stop to that. Of course, we have crime out here, but when the police is going to sit back on their hands and say, because we are protesting, because we are tired of being murdered and our civil rights violated. So what's going on with this country is ridiculous, and it's been allowed by law enforcement. And like I said, public safety and civil rights is going to definitely get me to the poll.
Well, Alan, let me ask you this, because what do you think when you hear the phrase defund the police?
I know exactly what it means because I am a grandfather. I'm an older African-American man here in Minneapolis. We need some of them funds that go to the police to go to programs to stop the violence, to mental health. I walked up on an officer that was using excessive force on a small child, and his mother definitely had some mental health issues. When I told that officer, we have a new policy here in Minneapolis that if the officer believes mental health involved, they're supposed to call a crisis team. That officer turned to me, cussed me out, placed me in handcuffs, and that's what type of officers we have. So defund the police does not mean that we are getting rid of the police. But when you have police acting like that, here in Minneapolis, we have police in jail for murder. We have police in jail for rape, for extortion.
And of course,
10 officers in jail.
And of course, Minneapolis was where George Floyd was murdered as well. Alan, thank you for your call. Diane Marlin, this has got to be one of the most challenging issues to deal with as a mayor. I assume you are the boss of the police chief.
Yes.
And you've got to deal with A, the issue of crime, and B, the issue of potentially police not behaving well sometimes. Like, how do you handle that?
Well, it is one of the hardest issues we've dealt with. I will say that the police force in the city of Urbana is tremendous, and we have a very good working relationship. But that said, in the last couple of years, since the George Floyd incident, it really caused us all to step back and say, okay, how can we be better? So we have, in the last 2 years, adopted a policy of a commitment to de-escalation called the 10 Shared Principles, which was developed by the NAACP and the Illinois Association of Police Chiefs. We completely rewrote our use of force policy, working with the ACLU, NAACP, the police chiefs, and community members. We're piloting what we're calling the Crisis Co-Responder Team, which is pairing our social workers following up on calls that come in for people experiencing behavioral crises or mental health crises. And our city council in the summer of 2020 voted to redirect the funding for equivalent to the salary of one patrol officer to pay for a public safety review. So we've just done the RFPs. We have 4 proposals we're evaluating. We're going to do a comprehensive review of our approach to public safety. So we are making some serious incremental and very strong, I think, changes.
Well, and Phillip Bailey, to you, I mean, you are the national political correspondent. So how big of an issue do you think that crime, this is certainly something Republicans have been wanting to make the issue in this election, or at least one of the main ones. How big of an issue is this going to be? And are people still voting in the same way that they would a year ago on this?
Well, first, Jeremy, look, black folk are tired. Poll after poll shows, and I'm here in Louisville, Kentucky, the home of where the Breonna Taylor shooting took place, which was sort of the twin issue in 2020, along with George Floyd's murder. Look, African-American voters, polling shows, are fatigued. And that's trouble for Democrats because, listen, the base of the Democratic Party are African-Americans. At the same time, post a lot of those protests in 2020, where millions took to the streets to demand police accountability, you saw very little follow-up in Washington. The George Floyd Policing Act went nowhere fast in Washington.
Right.
At the same time, this uptick in violent crime, which was very easily sort of converted from the rebellions and the protests and some of the looting and riots of 2020 into now this discussion of, oh, Democrats and their allies are accepting to fund the police. Now there's this rise in crime. But many folks, I think this is where your show and others are very important to these conversations. Defund the police is a very nuanced conversation. It's basically taking money from police agencies and shifting them over to other anti-crime fight initiatives. When you phrase it that way, the polling numbers for it actually go up. But when you simply say defund the police, in people's minds, it's this world of no police and everyone just, what did Senator John Kennedy in his ad, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana,
yep.
He runs an ad out there that says, well, next time you don't like what the police are doing, if someone's committing a crime, call a crackhead, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's this imagination that defund the police means no police whatsoever. When you talk to activists at that level, they're saying, no, it's about other crime-fighting initiatives and public safety measures that can be taken.
I remember interviewing the Democratic Congressman James Clyburn very early on in the conversation after the death of George Floyd, who said that he hated that term defund the police because people take it the way that they want to take it, and it's easy to put on a bumper sticker and hard to understand. Let's go to another call here that's come in. Vanessa in Duluth, Minnesota. Hi, Vanessa. Tell us, what is the most important issue to you heading into this election?
My most important issue is the environment, not just climate change, as important as it is, but how the environment is affecting human health.
What do you mean by that?
Yesterday I read a rather disturbing statistic in Harper's Magazine that came from the Centers of Disease Control. Half of all Americans age 18 to 34 have at least one chronic health condition, and 1/4 of Americans in that age group have two or more. And I wonder if a lot of that is coming from our food and air and water and soil being polluted.
Vanessa, thank you for that call. Mayor Diane Marlin here in Urbana, Illinois. What kind of, do these issues come up for you?
They do, and I would also add the link between chronic diseases and health is also related to food and nutrition, as I'm speaking as a former dietitian with a degree in foods and nutrition. Mm-hmm. But climate change is really weather change, and yes, that has an impact.
We should say, by the way, that here in Urbana, Illinois, it was 28 degrees as a low the other day, but it's going to be 75 this weekend, which doesn't seem normal to me, having lived here for the first half of my life. Let's go to...
you forget, it's normal.
It is normal. Okay, fine. Danilo in Houston is on the line. Danilo, welcome. What is the most important issue to you?
Hi. It's actually two issues, I would say. One is general economic opportunity. I've lived in Texas most of my life and been blessed by the opportunities given in the state. Be honest with you, as a former illegal immigrant, you'd think that it would be harder, but frankly, Texas has provided opportunities for education, for business growth, and for development that I didn't think were possible. And I'm concerned that with the demographic changes happening in the state, that specifically a lot of folks coming in from California and New York, and I don't mean to bag on that, but they're bringing another kind of mentality about business and about development that concerns me. So that's probably the principal issue for me. Just curious how that kind of demographic shift is considered in the middle. I mean, Houston is a big city, but I'm curious how you guys see that impacting other parts of the country as well.
Are you saying you're uncomfortable with the demographic shift? You're uncomfortable with the changes that are coming to your state and your city?
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And fundamentally, it's when you see the businesses coming to Texas, the Teslas of the world, and I mean, I'm not a big fan, but even the Bitcoin miners, making their way to the state, there's opportunity here, and that opportunity exists as a result of kind of the system that's been set up in the state with kind of limited regulation. And I'm concerned about, as that demographic shift happens, all that's just going to increase, and it'll reduce the economic opportunities over time. That's my biggest concern in this election.
Danilo, thank you for that call. Phillip, I think the issue there actually is one that comes up across this country, but also in other countries when we talk about elections, which is change. Change can be difficult for people.
Right, because let's take a step back here. I mean, the 2020 census showed the United States has experienced unprecedented multiracial population growth. At the same time, a decline in the white population for the first time in the nation's history. Mm-hmm. The white population, the white non-Hispanic population without another race actually decreased by 8.6% since 2010. So the browning of America that you keep hearing about in think pieces, it's happening, right? And this is a very different country than it was when my father was born back in 1955, right? With the surge of immigration, with the growth of racial minorities, and at the same time, the decline of the white population. In a state like Georgia, we keep bringing up Georgia, mm-hmm. The state is about 50.1%, right, non-white, right? And this is a question at the core both of the January 6th issue with election denialism. It's the core of the climate change issue. It's the core of a lot of our issues in this country. Can we have a multiracial democracy? We tried to do it during Reconstruction and we failed. And that's really at the core of a lot of these conflicts here with the caller just mentioned, is that there's this basic fear that a lot of white Americans have about the country doesn't look like I remember it even 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. And what will it look like 25 years from now? It will be a multiracial country. The question is, can we handle a multiracial democracy?
What are your thoughts on that, Mayor Diane Marlin?
Well, that's where cities like Urbana, Champaign, and all over the country, especially university communities, it's happening already. In Urbana, roughly 20% of our population was born in a different country. They may have arrived here 30 years ago. They may have arrived here 3 months ago. The University of Illinois is 56,000 students. Nearly 25% of those students are international students. So we are a multiracial community already. We have dozens of languages in our public schools and students here from 113 countries just at the university. So on a small scale, and this is being repeated, I think, all over the country, we are learning to live in a multiracial society.
Are you facing, though, people who are uncomfortable with it, who have a hard time with that change?
I have not personally heard, people haven't expressed that to me, but I think it's been gradual, it's been incremental, and it certainly has, from my personal perspective, and I think it's shared by a lot of people, it's enriched our community. The diversity we have here has enriched us rather than diminished.
Let's go to, I think we're going to have time for at least one more call here. Maximilian is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Maximilian, tell us, what is the most important issue to you heading into this election?
Yeah, certainly on the national front, abortion, that kind of stuff is important. But more on the local side of things, I'm actually very much concerned about the local school board elections, and particularly people that are kind of trying to implement their political agenda into school and how schooling goes. So yeah, I'm young, I'm college age, and I don't have any kids, but it certainly matters to me for the kids of my community, and making sure that educational standards are upheld.
Phillip Bailey, school boards were a big thing as we got into that election in Virginia, where Glenn Youngkin, the Republican, became the governor. Education was what that was all about. Do you see that being a big issue heading into this election? Do you hear from people in the middle of the country about that?
Oh, absolutely. Shout out to Chris Quintana from USA Today, who wrote a story about this, actually for us in October, about you seeing this surge of Republicans who are running for and wanting to win these school board races. And as we just mentioned earlier, Jeremy, as the country's becoming more diverse and more multiracial democracy, what are we also seeing? A backlash to that in the reference of critical race theory being sort of this hot button issue at the local school level, even though a lot of critical race theory isn't being taught at the local school level. But it still goes back to when you look at some of these state laws, like here in Kentucky and other places, it's this idea of how do we retell American history? Who gets to tell American history, and from what vantage point? Is George Washington still the hero who chopped down the cherry tree? Are we telling more of a story of him as someone who was this complicated man, or is he being told and cast more as a slave owner? these issues are coming up more and more because the country is changing. And even though Glenn Youngkin and others cast it as parents, often the coverage was focusing on white parents, because when you talk to African-American parents, they said, in fact, no, we want our children to learn the history of this country raw and unfiltered. And they still love the country anyway. It's this growing fissure I think we're going to see more and more, Jeremy, as the country becomes racially diverse, more diverse in terms of gender identity and sexual orientation, more religiously diverse, where you're going to see this effort to sort of reconfigure how we teach the basic fabric and the basic sentiment of the country.
That is Phillip Bailey, who is the national political correspondent for USA Today. We've been speaking with Urbana Mayor Diane Marlin. But right now, we have time for a little bit of fun as we close out this hour with Anthony Valadez, our DJ. Hey. Anthony, you're back.
Yep. Yeah, I am. It's that time for the needle drop. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to drop the needle in the middle of the record.
The middle. I see what you did there with that.
There it is, just connecting the dots. And you have to guess the name of this iconic Chicago-based band who celebrate the elements of life. Let's see. And if you can name the song as well, bonus points. Y'all ready?
Are you guys ready, Phillip and Diane Marlin?
Oh, I'm terrible at this.
Right,
sure.
Let's try it.
We're going to have some fun. Here we go.
Oh. Come on. That's easy.
Okay.
That's easy. Phillip?
Name that band.
That would be Earth, Wind, and Fire, which the lead singer is Phillip Bailey.
Phillip Bailey, but not you.
Not me.
Oh, we have a bell. Anthony has a bell.
No
Excellent.
relation.
No relation.
Let me ask you.
Congratulations on that.
What does he get, Anthony?
He gets $5 million Venmo to you from Jeremy Hobson's personal account.
Oh, yeah.
Pays it in Bitcoin, right?
Right, yes. Right, exactly.
Pennies over the next 500 years.
Yeah.
Anthony Valadez, that was the needle drop. I think you're going to have to make it more difficult next week because
I think so too.
That seemed like it was too easy.
I didn't know Phillip was going to be so on it like that, but congratulations.
And you didn't have Alison Krauss.
In your musical selections?
Next time.
Well, I want to thank USA Today national political correspondent Phillip Bailey and Urbana Mayor Diane Marlin for joining us. You guys were both such great guests for this first show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks, Anthony Valadez, our DJ at KCRW. Anthony, thank you to you as well.
Always a pleasure, Jeremy.
And next week, we are live from Fort Myers on the west coast of Florida. Our topic is going to be, how is the changing climate impacting you wherever you are in this country? And what, if anything, do you want the government to do about it? So you can reach out to us at 844-4MIDDLE or at listentothemiddle.com. You can leave a message before the show or call live. The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, produced by Alex Ashlock, John Barth, Sam Burmis-Dawes, Cece Fadupe, Lisa Napoli, and Harrison Patino. Our technical director is Jason Croft here at WILL, and we could not have done this show without the help of the team here. Lily Duncanson, Liz Westfield, Reginald Hardwick, and Moss Bresnahan. Our theme music composed by Andrew Haig. And thanks, of course, to KCRW, Louisville Public Media, and the more than 500 public radio stations that are making it possible for the entire country to listen to The Middle. I am Jeremy Hobson. I'll talk to you next Wednesday, live from Fort Myers.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
When segregation was a law, one mysterious Black club owner, Charlie Fitzgerald, had his own rules.
Segregation in the day, integration at night.
It was like stepping on another world.
Was he a businessman, a criminal, a hero?
Charlie was an example of power. They had to crush him
Charlie's Place from Atlas Obscura and Visit Myrtle Beach. Listen to Charlie's Place on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.